Spider-Man versus Kingpin 1991.
So we're getting toward the 12:30 mark.
Animated feature?
No, I'll explain to you in a minute. This might be our last thing for the night, but we could always do a part 2 next week. You want to do that? Because I'm not going to. Yeah, why don't we do that?
Sure.
We could do it to be continued, like on your
absolutely
old thing. Spider-Man versus the Kingpin for the Sega Genesis.
Oh, did not know. Yeah, I wasn't real into a lot of Spider-Man games, so cool.
This was a video game for the Sega Genesis. I didn't realize that I was doing some research for stream. This was actually an American developed. A lot of the Genesis games were developed in Japan. But this was an American developed. Sure. This was a Sega exclusive. This came out in summer of '92. I remember my brother got this, and the only other really great superhero video game I played before this was the NES Batman game. That Hudson made, that was based on, not Hudson, Sunsoft made, that was based on the '89 Batman movie. It was actually a very good NES game. Because a lot of the time, no offense, but when you saw Spider-Man on a video game, they weren't always that good back in the day.
No.
But this one was.
It was very, look, Spider-Man as a game character didn't get really good until the motion got fluid enough.
Like the 3D?
Yeah.
Kind of.
This modern one where you could play as him or as Miles Morales, that's pretty good. The choop choop, and you can swing and you can do flips and stuff, kind of like Batman Arkham, right?
Yeah, and the
very fluid motions and stuff.
The progenitor of that was actually the Spider-Man 2 game that was based on the Tobey Maguire movie back in the 6th generation. That was the first one where they basically said, let's do Grand Theft Auto, but with Spider-Man. That was the idea behind that. And, except you get to have them fly around, swing around. It's not, by modern standards, it's not as sophisticated as what you got on the PlayStation 4. But
true.
But before we had that, we had the old 2D side-scrolling games, and this one is rather good. Game starts out with a little intro screen, and look who it is. It's Wilson Fisk.
Yeah.
And he's on TV, and he's saying, "Citizens of New York City, I have some grave news. The villain known as Spider-Man has planted a bomb somewhere in this city, and it will go off. We must stop the Spider-Man." And Spider-Man's like, "Oh no, he's gonna blow up part of the city with a bomb."
Talk about confession through projection, yeah.
Yes, and I'm gonna get the blame for it. That's what he says. So I have to clear my name and stop him. And he has a bunch of supervillains working for him. He has Doc Ock. He has I don't know if Venom is working for Kingpin or if he just showed up and said, I want part of this. Okay.
Right.
He shows up in the game. I don't know. Electro's in it. A few other villains as well. And the Lizard, you fight the Lizard. In fact, there's one scene where you go up to Doc Ock and he says, you need this, you need it. Okay, fess up, Doc Ock. Well, you need 5 keys to stop the bomb, and I have only one of them. Oh, thanks for that tip, Doc Ock. And I bet the other villains have it, and I know where one of them is going to be. And he knows that he goes down to the sewers to go find the Lizard. And that's how the next level. You would take pictures during this game to get money, because you would take a picture of a boss.
Wow, cool.
And to get money, you had to get money and then buy web shooters, because you had limited web shooters in this game. You didn't have unlimited web shooters in this game. This is a side-scrolling portion of it, though. But
your life and your web had a limitation. Wow.
And after that, you're just stuck with punching and kicking. If you run out of web, you can tie guys up. I think that's what you could do, is you could tie guys up, or you could shoot things at these robots. But this was pretty state of the art and pretty true to the comics at the time. This is 91. This was a big boon for the Sega Genesis that they had the Spider-Man game. This is right before the Super Nintendo came out. So imagine you're a kid and you're deciding which console you want to buy. Well, Super Nintendo was Mario, but wow, there's this really cool Spider-Man game on the Genesis, and I'm a big Spider-Man fan. You might buy the Sega Genesis instead. Sega later on made an X-Men game too that was very popular as well. The weird thing about how licensing worked back then, though, someone would buy the license to Spider-Man and they would make that game for the Super Nintendo or the NES, but they wouldn't have the rights to make it on the Sega Genesis. And someone else could buy the rights to make a Spider-Man game on the Genesis. In this case, it was Sega that made the Spider-Man game. So it's kind of weird how
Yeah.
It's not like how Nintendo would often have exclusives, like they wouldn't allow Ninja, like some games to come out on other systems like Ninja Gaiden, but if it was based on a
Right.
property, they couldn't really stop that, like Spider-Man.
Right.
So Sega can make their own Spider-Man game. And eventually there was a Sega CD version that came out with like animated cutscenes too later on. But really neat. There's the
says this looks like the Rampage game. Was there some similarity there?
Not really, except you can climb buildings, like in Rampage. You could climb buildings, and if you climb the buildings, people open up the windows and are throwing pots at you, I think, or trying to hit you on the windows.
Yeah.
The funny thing was, I think, while you're walking in the streets, if a police officer sees you, the police officer tries hurting you, and you have to subdue the police officer. And then a mugger might come along and try and steal an old lady's purse, and you have to stop the mugger. And I think she thanks you if you do that and walks off, you know. But you have to realize that Spider-Man gets hit on all sides because some of the cops like him, some of them think he's a criminal.
That's interesting. So basically, you have the equivalent of side quests, something you don't really have usually in a side scroller.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, it was still linear going level to level, but I think you could go back to your apartment in the game and hang out there. Like to get, I don't know, to rejuvenate or do other things. I forget, but I think there was a scene where you could go back to Spider-Man's apartment. There's a wonderful scene where Mary Jane is in the apartment and Venom crashes through the window, and you see her say "Eek," and then Venom says, "Nicely said." Because I think he kidnaps her for the Kingpin, and he's going to hold Mary Jane over. I guess I don't know if those are knives or something, and you have to. Mary Jane is like lowering into that. And you have to fight the Kingpin, but you also have to hit something to send her back up so she doesn't hit because you don't want Mary Jane to die. But you have to stop the Kingpin. So this was a classic Genesis game. Unfortunately, we've not seen it since the Sega Genesis because, of course, the Spider-Man rights are very complicated. It would have been cool if this could get a re-release someday. Sega also made X-Men games that were very popular as well at the time, but. And they made a game based on Batman the Animated Series as well, Sega did. The Adventures of Batman and Robin, which has a kind of a cult following to it as well. That's the weird thing. Sega could put out a Spider-Man and X-Men game and then put out a Batman game. That's how licensing worked back then. They put out a Ghostbusters game. I think I've told you about that game before.
Yes.
But they put out Disney games. Sega did a lot of licensed games, and sadly, a lot of them are lost.
Is that the Ghostbusters game where it was just the three, and they didn't
have Winston, and then someone made a fan version where they added Winston to it.
Yep. So what they did was I guess they kind of blackfaced one of the other models.
Oh.
But what they did was the other three had particular stats. That like one was the good stat, like maybe I don't know, maybe Egon's was intelligence, and maybe what's his name? Venkman was wits or something like that, whatever. Well, Winston was average across the board, which there's actually a benefit to that. Yeah, because if you're higher in one skill, you'd be lower in something else.
You can jump higher, but then you have lower shooting trajectory or something like that. Yeah,
exactly. So Winston, being the everyman, right? He is average across the board, which actually means he doesn't have any particular weakness. Doesn't have any particular strength, but he doesn't have any particular weakness either. It was actually a brilliant fan made, fix to the game.
I wish Sega or Sony or someone would buy that up and just re-release it. You could have the original and also the fan remake on the same thing. I love the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man origin story in the game. I think it was a guy that loved Stay Puft Marshmallows so much he ate himself to death by eating them. And so he came back as a Stay Puft Marshmallow Man.
Wow. Yeah.
They made it different for the game, but I think as the game was in its own little universe, I guess. Even though it had the likenesses of Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis. But yeah, it was a cool little game. And this was a cool little game too. Sega did some great things back in the Genesis days. I kind of wish some of these games would find a way to get preserved. You play the games any way you can. That's all I'm going to say on the matter.
Right.
Hopefully, but if they release a legitimate version of this on like modern consoles, I would pick it up. Yeah.
Darth Plato just says it right out. If you have an emulator, you can play the game.
Yeah, you can. And I've always been curious about the Sega CD version because I think they added a couple levels to it too. So yeah.
Ghostbusters versus Large Marge would be a good movie. Yeah, you're not wrong there.
I'd like to think that some of these movies exist in the same universe. Like I always thought the Ghostbusters and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles could coexist in the same universe. I think
that would be a very interesting take on New York, wouldn't it?
They had similar sensibilities in their humor. I think it could have worked. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
In fact, I think they did crossover comics with the two of them. Yeah, but here we go. Spider-Man versus the Kingpin. Great classic Sega Genesis game.